Today we are going to be discussing rifle platoon operations in the offense. Now, if you haven't already watched the short clip from the Band of Brothers, I encourage you go back, click on the link, and check that out. Now, if you have already watched it, then what you just witnessed is a theatrical reenactment of one of the most famous platoon attacks in armed forces history. On June 6, 1944, First Lieutenant Richard Winters led the soldiers of Easy Company 506th as they attacked the German artillery battery, which threatened the success of the D-Day invasion. Now, what did you notice that allowed the platoon of soldiers led by Richard Winters to be successful when they conducted their attack? Some things that I noticed are, first, his ability to effectively communicate his plan. Now, he may not have used the SMEAC format with which we're all familiar, but he still found a way to effectively communicate his intent in the scheme of maneuver he wanted to execute so that his Marines could go out and make decentralized decisions on the objective in order to allow them to achieve their mission. Secondly, I noticed their effective use of terrain as they moved to the objective and then maneuvered on the enemy. At no point did any of the soldiers within Easy Company move without proper cover, either from terrain or from fire by an adjacent unit. And then finally, their use of fire maneuver allowed that maneuver element to rapidly close with the enemy while receiving support in the form of suppression from that support by fire element so that the maneuver element could then employ an HE solution, destroying the enemy position and ultimately accomplishing their mission. All of these are concepts that we are going to learn about throughout the course of this lecture and over the next few weeks as we continue with our platoon peer package. Now, does this slide look familiar to anyone? It should, because it's the mission statement here at the basic school. And as you can see, our goal here is to educate you as young officers with a particular emphasis on the duties, responsibilities, and warfighting skills required of a rifle platoon commander. And that begins today as we dive into the rifle platoon peer package. Now, up to this point, you've gone out and conducted some individual skills level training, doing things like land navigation, firing your rifle at the rifle range, covering some orders classes and communications classes, and that all prepared you to then go out and conduct FEX 1, where you learned about squad level tactics, culminating in your live fire event out at R5. And as we now transition into the platoon peer package, we need to continue to apply all of those skills in order to be successful. We are still going to need to be able to navigate from point to point. We must still be able to provide care to casualties using the methods that we use during CLS. We still need to be able to employ our individual weapon systems, and we also need to be able to operate effectively as a squad, because at the end of the day, effective squads are what is going to make up an effective platoon. Now, these are the Marines of 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. Marines that I had the privilege of leading during my time as a lieutenant in the operating forces. In just a few short months, you will be asked to likely step in front of a platoon of Marines and lead them as well. And your actions over these next few weeks during your remaining time here at the basic school are going to determine your preparedness to step in front of and lead these Marines. Every one of these Marines has a story. They have family, friends, some of them have spouses, children, hometowns. They all have a desire for what their life is going to look like in the future. And it is going to be your job to lead them as they continue on toward that future that they envision, both through everyday life circumstances and then possibly in combat. Are you going to be prepared to take on this responsibility? Your actions are going to determine that. So with this in mind, the responsibility as officers of Marines, let's dive in and find out how we are going to prepare you with the tools and concepts necessary to be successful once you leave the basic school and lead these Marines. We're going to begin here in this platoon level platform class. You are then going to receive 3 additional platform classes covering topics such as operating as a platoon at night, conducting platoon level defensive operations, and employing some engineering concepts into our platoon level defense. From there, you'll go on to conduct a series of tactical decision games and sand table exercises, where you will employ and continue to develop the skills and concepts that have been taught today. After that, you'll push out into the tree line during FEX 2, where you'll conduct a series of platoon level attacks against a dug in, prepared platoon level defense composed of your peers. After that, we will culminate the platoon peer package by conducting a live fire and maneuver attack against a prepared enemy position out at range 15. Now, this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to begin by discussing the two types of attacks that you can conduct as a rifle platoon while conducting offensive operations. From there, we'll briefly go over the 6 forms of offensive maneuver, focusing on the 2 forms of maneuver that you will conduct during your time here at the basic school. After that, we will deep dive on some support by fire considerations that will allow you to effectively employ a support by fire element in order to support your maneuver element as you close with the objective. We will then take a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll come back in part 2, working our way through a platoon level attack, beginning in our preparation phase, where we will use the 6 troop leading steps to guide our planning process, and we will then walk together through the conduct and consolidation phases of an attack. So let's go ahead and dive right in by discussing the 2 types of attacks that we can conduct as a rifle platoon during offensive operations. The first of which is a hasty attack. A hasty attack is defined as an attack when the commander decides to trade preparation time for speed to exploit an opportunity. And the key takeaway here is that the commander, in this case you, are making a deliberate decision to trade away some of that coordination, that deliberate preparation time in order to gain speed so that you can rapidly exploit a fleeting opportunity. This may be surprise against the enemy. This opportunity may be your superior size as compared to the enemy force, and you want to take advantage of that before they have the opportunity to reinforce. But either way, you are seeing a gap, putting it in terms of MCDP 1, that needs to be rapidly exploited. Therefore, you're going to conduct this hasty attack with less preparation time and coordination. Now, because of this, we're going to be heavily reliant upon our unit SOPs and our prior experiences in order to allow us to conduct this attack successfully. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have a deliberate attack, which is defined as a type of offensive action characterized by pre-planned and coordinated employment of firepower and maneuver to close with and destroy the enemy. And once again, our key takeaway here is that we are now deciding to take that extra time in order to perform that prior coordination, those rehearsals, that detailed planning in order to execute our scheme of maneuver. Now, because we have more time to plan, coordinate, and rehearse our scheme of maneuver, we may have the opportunity to employ a slightly more complex scheme of maneuver. But once again, as we go out to execute, we need to ensure that this is well rehearsed so that once we are on the objective, everyone clearly understands their individual task and is going to be able to perform it in a seamless manner to allow us to rapidly close with that enemy force. So that we've taken a look at the 2 types of attack, let's take a quick look at the 6 forms of maneuver. Doctrinally, we see that the 6 forms of maneuver listed here on the screen are a frontal attack, flanking attack, infiltration, penetration, envelopment, and a turning movement. However, as discussed during the squad level package, and that will remain the same during our platoon level package, we are going to focus on a frontal and flanking attack, which is the 2 forms of maneuver that you will conduct here at the basic school. A frontal attack is defined as an offensive maneuver where the main action is directed against the front of the enemy forces. This is what you likely would imagine when you think about conflicts such as the Civil War, as depicted here with Pickett's charge at the Battle of Gettysburg, or during World War I, as U.S. forces conducted unit online attacks in between the trenches in the area known as No Man's Land. Now, when do you think we might use this form of maneuver? Well, we could see it employed, as we did out at FEX 1, when we have a numerically superior advantage over the enemy. So we have that good 3-to-1 ratio of our forces when compared to the enemy that could allow us to overwhelm the enemy solely based upon the size of our force. We may also use it when we're trying to have a rapid and simple scheme of maneuver to take advantage of a fleeting opportunity, such as having surprise over the enemy force. But what do you think maybe one of the drawbacks of employing this is? Well, if we put it in terms of MCDP1, when we're conducting a frontal attack, we are attacking in the enemy's surface or the front of their defense, right into the teeth of their defensive position where they want us to attack, which means they're going to be prepared to defend within that area, and this could result in us incurring a higher level of casualties if not used in the appropriate situation. Now, the second form of maneuver that you'll conduct here at the basic school is a flanking attack. And this is an offensive maneuver directed at the flank of an enemy force. So once again, putting it in terms of MCDP1, instead of attacking the enemy's surface or their frontage, we are now identifying and exploiting a gap, which in this case is the enemy's flank, in order to avoid that prepared defensive position and possibly allow us to sustain a lower level of casualties. Now, something you may have noticed if you tried to conduct a flanking attack out in the tree line during FEX 1 is that as we maneuver toward the enemy's flank in order to place ourselves and our Marines at an advantage, the enemy has the ability to rapidly reorient on our position, taking our flanking attack and turning it back into a frontal attack, where we are forced to attack into that enemy's surface, into that prepared engagement area or the frontage of their defense, which could possibly have devastating results. So how do we avoid this? How do we ensure that the enemy is not able to reorient on our maneuver element and mass their fires upon us as we close? Well, one technique that we can use to do this is known as fire and maneuver. And this is a technique that we can use that requires a separate and distinct tactical task, which is assigned to each unit. While using this, one unit is going to suppress the enemy in order to allow the other unit to maneuver to a position of advantage, likely on that enemy's flank, and then rapidly close with that enemy position using that good fire and movement that we learned about during our squad level package. Now, as you may know, if you attempted to do fire and maneuver in the tree line during FEX 1, executing this effectively is going to require some additional techniques that we can use to gain effective command and control, controlling our dispersed units as we move throughout the battle space, as well as those fires from the support by fire unit in order to allow for the proper coordination that will allow our maneuver element to close. Now, there are two distinct units that exist when we conduct an attack using fire and maneuver. The first of which is the maneuver element. The maneuver element is going to be that element that is closing with the enemy position, and they're going to do so using fire and movement, which we learned about during our squad level package. During fire and movement, just as a refresher, one buddy is going to suppress in order to allow that other buddy to assess the effects of that suppression, move to the next piece of cover, and then assume the suppression so that the next buddy can then pick up and move. And as each of these buddies move forward, they are going to continue to close with that enemy while using the 300 mil rule to avoid fratricide. Now, the other distinct unit that we have when conducting an attack using fire and maneuver is the support by fire element. Support by fire is a tactical mission in which a force engages the enemy by direct fire to support a maneuvering force using overwatch or by establishing a base of fire. Or to put it in more simple terms, the support by fire element is going to suppress the enemy through direct fire means to provide the necessary cover for the maneuver element to close. The support by fire element is thereby preventing the enemy from effectively maneuvering or reorienting their positions and then massing their fires on the maneuver element. Now, a unique relationship exists between the support by fire and the maneuver element when we are conducting fire and maneuver. We refer to this relationship as TED and TING. Now, the support TED unit, known as TED, or the maneuver element, is the unit that owns the effects of fires. It is up to them to determine when they have received enough support. The maneuver element is going to be the most exposed to the enemy during this attack. Therefore, they are the ones that get to decide when they have received adequate support from that support by fire element. They get to decide if they need more suppression in order to close, or if the suppression is adequate and they can begin their closure with that enemy position. Now, our second unit is going to be known as TING. The support TING unit, or the support by fire unit, supports the support TED unit or the maneuver element in every way that it can until the supported unit no longer requires the support. So the support by fire element is going to provide as much support as they can in the form of suppression for as long as they can in order to continue to fix that enemy, prevent them from reorienting on our maneuver element, and to allow the maneuver element to continue to close. Now, there are a few rules that govern the relationship that exists between TED and Ting. The first of which is that Ting works for TED, or in our situation, the support by fire element works for the maneuver element. The maneuver element tasks the support by fire element, and they also determine what support they need the support by fire element to provide. Secondly, Ting stops when TED no longer needs support, and only when TED no longer needs support. So that support by fire element is going to provide as much suppression for as long as the maneuver element needs in order to allow that maneuver element to close. And it is only when the maneuver element has decided that they have enough suppression that the support by fire element can cease those fires. So how do we take this relationship and these concepts and integrate them into our detailed planning in order to conduct an effective attack using fire and maneuver? Well, the answer to this is the way that we effectively emplace that support by fire element. There are 4 principles that guide our emplacement of the support by fire unit. The first of which is that an effective support by fire position provides maximum suppression of the enemy position. We need to be able to suppress as much of that enemy position as possible in order to prevent them from effectively reorienting their position and massing their fires on the maneuver element. Now, typically, we often see this done by placing our support by fire position directly in front of that enemy's defense so that we can suppress the entirety of that enemy's frontage. Now, this may not always be the case, but it's generally a good rule of thumb that we can use as a starting point for when planning our scheme of maneuver using fire and maneuver. Now, the second principle of effective support by fire emplacement is that an effective support by fire position must have cover and concealment for that support by fire element. Now, in the same way that when we're conducting fire and movement, the Marine that's in that 4 position that is suppressing the enemy still uses microterrain to provide themselves with some cover. The support by fire element needs to use microterrain in order to provide them with cover as they are suppressing the enemy. This is going to provide them with some additional survivability and prevent the enemy from affecting their position as they attempt to provide support to that maneuver element. Now, our third principle of effective support by fire emplacement is that an effective support by fire position has adequate fields of observation of both the enemy and the maneuver element. Now, it seems pretty obvious why we would need to be able to see the enemy, and it really goes back to our 5th weapon safety rule of knowing our target and what lies beyond and in between. And it gets at the concept that we need to be able to see what we're firing at in order to employ direct fires effectively as we are attempting to suppress the enemy. But why do you think we need to be able to see the maneuver element? Well, if we play out the course of events in our head as the maneuver element closes, there's going to come a point where our fires, our suppression on the enemy, may actually end up affecting and suppressing our own maneuver element as they close with that objective. So in order to keep this from happening and prevent fratricide, the support by fire element needs to be able to see the maneuver element as they close with the objective so that they know when they need to shift or cease their fires in order to prevent that fratricide as the maneuver element closes. Finally, our last principle of effective support by fire emplacement is that an effective support by fire position enables the maneuver element to get as close as possible to the enemy position before the support by fire element is forced to shift and cease those fires. As we discussed with the relationship between TED and Ting, the support by fire element needs to suppress for as long as possible in order to allow that maneuver element to close. So an effective support by fire position is going to facilitate that. Now we can sum up all of these rules by saying that an effective support by fire position allows Ting to support TED for as long and as effectively as possible. So how do we do this? How do we accomplish this mission of supporting the maneuver element for as long as possible? Well, one way we do that is through the effective employment of geometries of fire. Geometries of fire are defined as the physical offset that exists between the orientations and positions of friendly units on the battlefield. And effective geometries of fire are going to maximize the effectiveness of our fires while mitigating the risk of fratricide specifically to that maneuver element. And we do this by, in ideal circumstances, creating between a 60 to 90 degree offset between the maneuver's axis of attack and the support by fire position's direction of fire. So let's take a look at what this is going to look like on the deck. Now here we have the maneuver element. They're going to be attacking from south to north into the flank of that enemy defensive position with a direction of attack at 360 degrees. Now that means that our support by fire position with that good 60 to 90 degree offset needs to have a direction of fire between 270 degrees and 300 degrees. Now, once again, by providing that 60 to 90 degree offset, we are going to ensure that we can suppress for as long as possible before we are forced to shift or cease our fires in order to prevent the occurrence of fratricide. But when do we shift and cease those fires? How do we identify the point on the deck at which we need to cease those fires in order to prevent us from causing fratricide to the maneuver element? Well, the support by fire unit is going to shift or cease fires when the risk of fratricide outweighs the risk of enemy fire to the supported unit. Or to put it in other terms, they're going to shift and cease those fires when the risk of committing fratricide, of suppressing our own maneuver element, is greater than the risk of the enemy reorienting and massing their fires on the maneuver element. And the point on the deck at which this occurs is known as the minimum safe line. The minimum safe line, or the MSL, is a line which extends forward from the support by fire position, which denotes the point at which the support by fire element must either shift or cease their fires. So when the maneuver element crosses an MSL, that support by fire element will then shift or cease their fires, which will then allow the maneuver element to continue their closure without preventing fratricide. And we need to aim to tie this MSL to a recognizable terrain feature on the deck so that both the support by fire element and the maneuver element can easily identify it and then conduct the proper coordination in order to allow the maneuver element to cross that MSL and continue their closure. How do you think we determine where the MSL is going to be located? Well, for unfixed weapon systems such as your M4, M16, or IAR, or any sort of belt-fed or crew-served weapon that is not locked down on a tripod, so it's going to be firing off of its bipod, such as the 240 and the 249 depicted here, we're going to use the rule of thumb of a 45-degree offset from the support by fire's direction of fire. Now, for fixed weapon systems, such as a 240 that is secured on a tripod using the T&E, we can reduce this offset from the direction of fire down because of the additional accuracy and control that we gain over the weapon system by placing it on that tripod. So again, just to review, unfixed fires, personal weapon systems, or anything that's not on a tripod, 45-degree offset from our direction of fire is where we are going to place our MSL. For fixed weapon systems, anything locked down on a tripod, we're going to reduce that down to 15 degrees in order to provide some additional suppression as the maneuver element closes. Now, these apply only in training. So what about in combat? How are we going to determine when we need to shift or cease those fires in order to allow the maneuver element to close once we have a thinking, breathing enemy that is actively returning fire toward the maneuver element? Well, in combat, our MSL is going to be whatever TED needs, whatever that support TED element or that maneuver element needs in order to close with the objective. This may be 45 degrees, this may be 15 degrees, this may be 1 degree for an unfixed weapon system. It doesn't matter. It is whatever that maneuver element unit leader decides that they need from the support by fire element in terms of suppression in order to allow them to successfully close with that enemy position and accomplish their mission. Now, as a rule of thumb or a baseline planning factor, we plan for 15 degrees for all weapon systems. However, once again, it is only going to come down to whatever TED needs. Now let's take a look at what this is going to look like after we review some of the concept of our target reference points. Now, a target reference point, or a TRP, is known as what an easily recognizable point on the ground, either natural or man-made, that we can use to initiate, distribute, or control our fires. It is going to be tied to our MSLs in order to allow the support by fire element to quickly shift and cease their fires as the maneuver element closes. So let's take a look at what this is going to look like on the deck. Here we have our maneuver element located on the left-hand side of your screen, and then toward the bottom of your screen, we have the support by fire element. As the support by fire element occupies their position, they're going to identify their target reference points across that enemy position. Here we've established 3 different target reference points going from left to right. And that support by fire element is going to suppress the enemy position in between those target reference points. So here they are going to begin by suppressing in between TRPs 1 and 2. Now, in order to determine where our MSL is going to be, we need to identify the target reference point that is closest to that maneuver element. In our case, that's going to be TRP1, and we're going to shoot an azimuth to that and discover that TRP1 is at an azimuth of 315 degrees from the support by fire element. So now that we know our direction of fire, we're going to apply our 45-degree offset because this is the Platoon pure package, so you're only going to have your personal weapon systems that are organic to a rifle platoon. And so after we apply that 45-degree offset, we can then determine that our MSL1 is going to be at 270 degrees. So this will be the point at the deck that once the maneuver element crosses this line, we then need to shift our fires in order to prevent fratricide and allow them to continue to close. So here we have the maneuver element closing. Once they reach MSL1, the support by fire element will then shift their fires from in between TRPs 1 and 2 to TRPs 2 and 3. Now we are going to complete the same process that we completed for TRP1. We're going to identify the TRP that is closest to the maneuver element, which in our case is TRP2, determine the azimuth from the support by fire position to that TRP, which in our case is going to be 350 degrees. We are then going to apply that good 45-degree offset and then determine our MSL, which is going to be at 305 degrees, and we will call this MSL2. So now, as we are suppressing in between TRPs 2 and 3, the maneuver element can continue to close until they reach MSL2. Now, at this point, we need to cease our fires in order to allow that maneuver element to continue to close without committing fratricide. So support by fire element will cease their fires, that MSL will go away, and the maneuver element will now have the ability to clear through the remainder of the objective and accomplish their mission. So now that we've taken a look at how we can effectively control our fires and support that maneuver element as they close with the objective, let's look at how we're actually going to get our support by fire element into position to provide that suppression. Now, there are 2 methods of occupation that we can use in order to allow our support by fire element to move into their support by fire position. The first is going to be using stealth. Now we're going to employ this when the enemy is unaware of our occupation. So when they maybe don't know where we are at and they're not able to observe our support by fire position and see our support by fire element as they move into that support by fire position. Now we may use this, for example, at night, which is a time in which the enemy may not be able to observe our occupation. And what this allows us to do is retain the element of surprise. So it allows us to move that support by fire position in place, allow them to become fully established, and then initiate their fires whenever they are then ready to do so. But this may not always be possible. There may come a time when the enemy has an LPOP or another position that is on the terrain feature where you want to place your support by fire position, or they may just be able to observe that position from their defense. So in this case, we're going to need to use force or some sort of fires that either isolate or suppress the enemy in order to allow us to occupy that support by fire position. This may come from the maneuver element as they isolate our support by fire position, or from suppression from some sort of indirect fire asset that maybe is suppressing the enemy as we move into position. Now, if we're going to occupy by force, we've given up the element of surprise. So as soon as that support by fire element reaches their support by fire position, they are immediately going to begin suppression in order to provide themselves cover, and then to also provide that suppression for the maneuver element as they close. Now, TCMs that we talk about when we're discussing support by fire operations are the support by fire cold position and the support by fire hot position. The support by fire cold position is going to be where the support by fire element prepares to occupy their support by fire position. You can also think of this as like an assault position for the support by fire unit. It's going to be a place where we have cover from terrain that prevents the enemy from observing and affecting our support by fire position so they can conduct that final coordination and those preparatory actions. They will then move into the support by fire hot position using one of our two methods of occupation. And it's at that support by fire hot position where they will actually begin suppressing the enemy. So now that we've seen how we're going to move the support by fire element into place in order to provide suppression, let's talk about what the support by fire element is going to do once the maneuver element has cleared through and consolidated on the objective. Now, once we've consolidated on the objective, we want to move our support by fire position or element from their support by fire position to the objective and include them in our consolidation. And the method that we use to coordinate this displacement is known as a MORT statement. Now, MORT stands for method, objective, route, and time. When we say method, we are discussing by unit or by echelon. Or in other words, by unit means that the entire support by fire element, whether that's a squad or a fire team or an entire platoon, they are all going to pick up together and move as one cohesive unit to your link up point. If you were to use the method of by echelon, this would mean that they are going to break up into smaller subcomponents. So if we have an entire squad in the support by fire position, we may break down and move by individual fire teams so that one fire team moves from the support by fire position to the objective and consolidates. And then once they are there, the next fire team can go. And we're going to continue to echelon these forces through until we have all consolidated on the objective. Now, objective means where are we going? We're just telling them where we want them to move to in order to then consolidate with the rest of the unit. This could be on the objective itself, or it could be a predetermined link up point that you've established for them to meet up with the rest of the platoon. With route, we're typically talking about the most direct, the most covered and concealed, or some other proven route that you have already determined and that you want that unit to follow. So here we're making an analysis of the enemy situation as well as how rapidly we determine that we need to be able to consolidate on the objective. If we determine that we need to rapidly consolidate on the objective and that the threat of an enemy force attacking the support by fire unit as they make their movement is low, then we may have them move via the most direct route or a straight line to the objective. However, if we think that the likelihood of a counterattack is low, but the likelihood of a patrol or some other enemy unit within the AO attacking our support by fire unit is high, we may have them use the most covered and concealed route. Well, they'll use some of those good route planning techniques that you learned during PECs in order to move from the support by fire position to the objective or the link up point in order to prevent them from coming into contact with the enemy. And then finally, we have time. What is the time or the condition on the deck at which you want the support by fire element to displace and move to the objective? And then we can likely tie some sort of visible signal, such as popping smoke on the objective, in order to act as a redundant means of communicating when we want that support by fire element to displace and join us in our consolidation. So this is what we've covered during the first part of our platform today. We first discussed the two types of attack, being the hasty and deliberate attack, and talked about when we might employ each of those in some of the trade-offs, the things that we gain as well as sacrifice by using each of those types of attack. From there, we dove into and looked at quickly the two types of forms of maneuver that you may employ as a rifle platoon conducting offensive operations, those being that frontal and then flanking attack. Once again, looking at some of the pros and cons that accompany each of those and thinking about when we may employ each of those forms of offensive maneuver. And then finally, we conducted a deep dive looking at our support by fire considerations, examining the relationship that exists between TED and Ting, talking about how we determine our MSLs and use geometries of fire in order to allow us to effectively support that maneuver element as we close. And then we wrapped it up by talking about our methods of occupation and then that MORT statement that is going to allow us to consolidate with the support by fire element on the objective. This is going to conclude the first portion of our platform. Go ahead and take a quick 5 to 10 minute break. And then when you're ready, come back and we'll begin part 2 together, where we will take these principles that we have learned and apply them as we plan and then conduct a platoon attack against a prepared enemy defensive position using fire and maneuver together.